Good evening, Prof. Always great to chat to you. First off, I absolutely have to ask you, you probably don't, but any idea when exactly the President is going to speak to South Africa again?
Good evening, Sally, and good evening to all the viewers. I have no idea. Can't answer the question, sorry.
Had to try. Now, last week you came onto the show and you shared a presentation. It painted a picture of what I would say is cautious optimism. Most provinces getting through the worst of the pandemic. Has that picture changed at all in the last week since we spoke? Are we still on track to be getting through the worst for now? And does the science then support an easing of our lockdown?
So there's been some progress since the presentation and the data I presented last week. The first is that most of the provinces are now showing quite a clear downward trend. The three big provinces, Eastern Cape, Western Cape, and Gauteng, all have quite clear downward trends. In fact, the Gauteng decline is quite impressive. And I think the Premier is quite right that, as impressive as it is, we need to still be cautious. KwaZulu-Natal is the one area I was deeply concerned about. And I have to say, I still maintain some concern because it's still, the trends it's come down and then it's gone back up and now it's coming down. So it's not a very clear, consistent downward decline. But I think it's reached a point where we can be cautiously optimistic that it's on the decline now because it's been declining for the last few days consistently. I'd like 14 days to be absolutely, confident.
Right. Does the science support an easing of our lockdown, let's say in the next week?
Yeah, I think when you look overall at the state of the epidemic, we should be easing our restrictions as the risk declines. And the risk has now declined quite substantially. And if we look at where we are, what's important is to look at the consistency of the markers. So we want to see, are cases declining? Is the proportion of test positive declining? Are the admissions declining? And are the deaths declining? And if we look across all four indicators, we see a very consistent trend that all of these indicators tell us that we are on the downward decline. However, we need to be just somewhat cautious in that other countries, when they've been in this same situation and eased their restrictions too quickly, they had a rebound and the cases started to go up again. So we need to ease restrictions in a careful way, but we should be easing restrictions. The evidence suggests that we should be easing restrictions, but we need to be careful that we don't ease them too much so that we allow super spreading events, like sports stadia being filled and so on.
It was interesting, a few days ago I spoke to Dr. Charles Parry and he was saying that the ban on alcohol sales has to end sometime soon, but they're looking at a very, very cautious way of opening up sales so that it doesn't have this rebound effect. I want to try and pin you down. If I had to say to you, all right, I'm hearing what you're saying, that we in many ways are through the worst for now, that all the markers are looking good, but equally we can't be reckless and open everything up because that second wave is most likely going to hit. What would you suggest is the most sensible way, bearing in mind that everything is risk adjusted, everything is about getting that balance right? Would you say that we need another 2 weeks of lockdown level 3? Would you say that we just need a few more days and we can open up quite soon? Would you say this is the time to look at certain provinces unlocking more than others?
So I think we've reached now a point where I think it's, I would be reasonably comfortable with proceeding to easing the restrictions down a level. I think when we look at particular concerns, they revolve around mass gatherings. I think if we can ensure that we maintain our restrictions on gatherings, for example, not easing any restrictions on places of worship, on issues like family functions and weddings and funerals. If we maintain those, because those carry a very high risk, and within a matter of days, they can turn the entire epidemic around. So if we maintain those restrictions, I think most of the others can go. And certainly the pressure has eased very substantially on our healthcare services, and that's on the ground information and certainly what the numbers tell us.
Okay, so what I'm hearing you saying is that it's fairly safe as long as we keep a very careful eye and don't change the limits on places of worship, around weddings, funerals. Does that mean that things like gyms, conferences should also stay banned for now?
Yeah, I think gyms are a more complicated situation. If there are good risk mitigation plans that would allow gyms to open, but they need to be done very carefully. But issues where you're talking about mass gatherings, those I would be very hesitant on.
Right, so no big music concerts, that sort of thing.
Exactly.
Right, so does that suggest that alcohol sales and perhaps even tobacco sales could be fairly safely lifted? I mean, tobacco we know is not so much an immediate problem in terms of safety. Alcohol certainly can be if it's done recklessly.
Yeah, I see no continuing reason for restricting alcohol use. I did notice that when the alcohol restrictions were lifted after level 4, that we saw a drastic change and a lot of binge drinking. And so I would be hesitant to just ease it completely. I think there has to be just some careful easing on that front, but there's no reason why, for example, regular sales of alcohol can't proceed. If I was looking at the data in terms of health reasons, I don't see any.
Would a safe lockdown level 2 include people allowed to travel across provinces for leisure, for example? Do you think that's safe?
So interprovincial travel was a big concern of ours because of the way in which the epidemic was unfolding across the different provinces, and that we had the virus spreading in the Western Cape while it was not spreading in KwaZulu-Natal. So interprovincial travel will simply increase the risk of spreading people moving from one area at high risk into an area of low risk. Important role to play in our understanding of this particular epidemic. It is not a useful test to diagnose somebody in acute disease. So if you're trying to establish whether you have acute coronavirus infection or acute COVID-19, the test doesn't help. But if you want to know whether somebody has been exposed, if you want to know whether somebody has had the infection without symptoms, then the antibody test becomes helpful. And so it's got a very specific place in order to understand the epidemic as a whole.
All right. Well, thank you so much for your time this evening. That is Professor Salim Abdool Karim. He, of course, is the chairperson of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on COVID-19. So positive signs there that we really are. The science does support. The markers are looking good, that we are just about ready to ease our lockdown.